Good morning and welcome to our Sunday morning Bible class. We're very appreciative for you and your presence, and we look forward to a good period of study this morning and some good worship services today. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We're moving right along in our series of lessons that we're entitling Reach Your One. It's a 4-week course on sharing your faith, learning how to be more effective at reaching out to our community and reaching out to those lost souls in our life. So we're moving right along with that. This morning is our second of these 4 classes, and we're just picking right up where we left off last week. We talked about last week, as we began this study, the importance of being a church that's focused on our community. We talked about a contrast between being an inwardly focused church and an outwardly focused church. And of course, we want to be an outwardly focused church. But how do we do that? How do we practically focus our attention away from ourselves, what's on the inside, to those on the outside? We talked about that a lot last week. That's important because there's 3 spiritual stages where a person can be. And it's our job as the church to help them take their next step as they get closer and closer to Christ. We talked about those again last week. We talked about those who are prospects. And of course, everybody outside of Christ is a prospect. They can potentially give their life to Christ, become a child of God, and be a very faithful member of the body of Christ. So we have prospects. Then we have pupils. How do we take someone who's a prospect and make them a pupil, someone in our home who's learning the gospel, learning the will of God? Then we have the next step, and that's a producer, someone who's no longer a prospect. We've made contact with them. We've now gotten them in our home to learn the gospel plan of salvation. And now they've given their life to Christ, and they're a faithful, active, producing member of the body of Christ. It's very important for us, again, as a church, to focus our attention on our community. Otherwise, as we ended last week, no prospects equals no pupils, and no pupils equal no producers. It's where it all begins. But as we continue with that train of thought, reaching out to our community and trying to make contact with those lost souls around us here in this world, whenever we as a church begin to focus our attention on our community, something is going to happen. Something's going to happen. And one of the things that's going to happen is there will be an influx of visitors. When a church is focused on their community and they're trying to reach their community and they're doing something sustained all throughout the year and they're doing something seasonal at various moments in time throughout the year and they're doing something special at various times throughout the year, and we as a church are focused on reaching our friends and our neighbors, something will naturally happen. There will be more visitors, more newcomers, more guests. Now, have you ever wondered why is it that a person chooses to visit a congregation? Why would someone make a choice to wake up on Sunday morning, get ready, and drive to Eastern Meadows and visit with us? Of all the hundreds of churches here in Montgomery, why would someone choose to come visit us? Well, there's something known as the 5D theory. There's at least 5 reasons why people visit churches. These are 5 basic reasons why. They're very interesting and very important. The first is because of a divorce. The second is a death. The third is they've been displaced. The fourth is they've had a disaster in their life. And the fifth is they're looking for development. And so think about those for just a moment or two. The divorce, if someone's going through a divorce, they're in need. They're wanting some answers to their questions. They're having a hard time in life, and sometimes a divorce prompts people to reach out and visit a church in their community. A death, if they've lost their parent or lost their spouse or lost a child or a close friend, they might now be thinking about spiritual things more and choose to visit a church for the very first time. Perhaps the most common reason is displacement. They've had to move. Have you ever had to move to a new city? I have. You're looking for a new church home. Maybe you've moved to a new community. You're looking for a church home. That happens here in our community. The next is disaster. Someone might be facing a disaster in life. It might be money problems. It might be marriage problems. It might be problems at work. It might be a house fire. Any number of things could prompt them to want to visit a church for the first time. And then a big one, number 5, is development. If you were to Google this afternoon, why do people go to church? I think you'd be shocked at the results. The number one reason why people go to church is not to be entertained. We often say that, though, and I don't like saying that because I don't think it's very true. The reason why people go to church is because, number one, the statistics say they want a relationship with God. They're wanting development. They're wanting to grow in their relationship with God. The number 2 reason is this: they want a relationship with other people. That's the number 1 and number 2 reason why people go to church. So those 5 reasons there suggest something. That's the 5D theory as to why people pop in as guests for the first time at a church. The reality is, friends, that it's not random. When someone gets up on a Sunday morning and chooses to come visit the Eastern Meadows Church of Christ, it's not just because they drove by and decided to stop in. There's a reason why this person chose to come here. And what these statistics and what this research and this theory suggest is that most people who are visitors are searching for something. They're searching for direction. They're searching for answers. And the fact that they're visiting you suggests they think that we can help. So here's the question this morning as we continue our study of reaching others and reaching our community. When visitors come, will we be ready? Will we be ready, welcoming, and receptive to these people who come our way from our community, who are looking for meaning and purpose and direction in life? Our second lesson today will focus on not just being a church that's focused on our community, but number 2, to reach our community, we must be a church that is welcoming to newcomers. It is essential. I'll go ahead and warn you, I might mention some things today that you might think of as not really being too important. I might talk about some things today that you've never thought about before. I might mention some things today that you really think aren't as essential as I'm making them out to be. But friend, please hear it with an open mind. And let's strive our very best to be a church that's welcoming as best we can be to newcomers. Let's do 2 things this morning. Number 1, we'll think about a survey on welcoming guests. We'll think about our congregation from the visitor's perspective. And number 2, we'll think about some steps to be more welcoming to guests. Unfriendliness and an overall lack of preparation for new people is a surefire way to hinder any forward progress. If a church really is littering their community with evangelism and striving to, as it were, beat the bushes and bring in those who are lost and reach those thousands of prospects and make them pupils and then producers, guests will come their way. Now, do you suppose that most churches think they're friendly or think they're an unfriendly church? What do you guys think? If someone say it out loud, what do you think? Do you think most churches think they're a friendly church or an unfriendly church? Friendly, exactly right. Most churches would say we're the friendliest bunch in town. We're the friendliest group of people you could ever meet. Now, friends, I'm not saying this to exalt myself, but I've been to a lot of congregations in the Lord's church. I've had the privilege to preach for many congregations in the Lord's church. And not every church is a friendly church. That's just the reality of it. But most churches think they are a friendly church. But I think what happens oftentimes is this: it's possible that we can be friendly among ourselves, with our friends and our family and our connections in the church. And so from that perspective, yes, we're friendly, but what about the new people? What about those that don't know anybody here? What about those that come in looking for direction in life and they're brand new to this congregation? You see, sometimes people who are visitors can feel invisible. They can feel overlooked. Meanwhile, we're friendly and mingling among ourselves. That's possible in the church. And so it's very important for us here at this juncture to view ourselves as a church through the lens of a visitor. What would a visitor see whenever they came to visit the Eastern Meadows Church of Christ? Have you ever wondered why someone came to visit and they never came back? Maybe it was a couple, maybe it was an individual, maybe it was a family. And they came to visit perhaps for a Sunday or two, then they never came back. Well, there was some research done, and it gave 10 findings. And it's found in a book called Becoming a Welcoming Church. Now, I'll just go ahead and warn you, this is not a member of the Lord's church writing this book. This is not a Church of Christ book. But I think the research is still valid. A survey was conducted among guests who came to visit many different churches for the very first time. And the results demonstrated the reasons why these people in these various church situations chose not to come back. It's 10 findings, and we'll go through those very quickly. Number one, they're in order. The first reason why was superficial greetings. When the new person came in this church, they felt like the greetings were fake. They felt like they were forced. They didn't feel like those who talked with them were being sincere and heartfelt and genuine. It was almost as if they just had to do it. And so for that reason, they did not come back. Bear in mind, in many denominational churches, there's a stand and greet session. That's very fake, isn't it? That's very not sincere, not from the heart, this stage stand and greet session. So perhaps that's a part of that. The number two reason why is this: unfriendly church members. The guests would come in, and either members did not talk to them, they felt ignored, or they felt invisible. But those visitors saw that the church members were talking and mingling and friendly among themselves. We just mentioned that a moment ago. But to them, a newcomer, someone from the outside, the church members were unfriendly and unwelcoming. Number three reason why is this: they perceived that the church had an unclean and unsafe children's area. You might do something to me and that's okay, right? But my children, that's something different, right? That's how we think as parents and as grandparents. And if you think about people in the world, in our culture today, we are very geared towards safety, and especially in church situations, whereas in the past, those things might not have been thought about or even considered. It's not uncommon to hear of church shootings. These crazed individuals coming into church buildings and shooting people as they're trying to worship God. Whenever people come to visit, one of the things in their mind, this research says, is the safety of their children. They want to make sure their children are not going to be left in an area that's unclean in the building. Their kids are not left somewhere where they're vulnerable and where they're in danger, perhaps. That was on the minds of these people. And one of the reasons why they didn't come back is because they thought these churches were not clean and they weren't safe. The next one is this: there was a lack of information available about the church. COVID ruined a lot of things, but before COVID, visiting in hospitals, one of the first things I would do, even if I knew the room number of the patient I was visiting, I would go find the welcome center, right? I would go find one of those volunteers wearing their vest, and I would ask them where the room was. I was looking for information. That's our culture. That's how we're programmed and hardwired today. And these guests, whenever they entered these churches, they looked for a centralized location where they could go and find more information about that church. We call that a welcome center, a welcome booth, a welcome table, whatever it is. They were looking for something like that, where they could go and pick up some information to learn more about this church they're scoping out. But they could not find such locations. They were looking for information, but it could not be found. The results even said that they found welcome centers, they found welcome stations in many of these churches, but there's one problem. They weren't manned. There was no one there to give them information and point them in the right direction. The next is this. The church had a bad or no church website. If you're like me, if you're going somewhere, maybe a restaurant, maybe a store, maybe even a church, one of the first things I do is I Google where I'm going. I want to know the hours. I want to know the exact location. I perhaps want to pull up Google Maps and see what buildings are nearby. And that's what these guests were doing. You see, it's not random, a guest coming. There's a lot of planning and thinking in their mind going on to why they're coming here. And beforehand, many of these guests looked for a web presence for these churches. And either one could not be found, or their web presence was so cluttery they could not find the info they were looking for. They were looking for just two things. Can you guess those two things? What do you guys think visitors are looking for on a church website when they Google a church beforehand? There's two things they're looking for. That's exactly it. John said the service times and the church's address. That's it. That's all they're looking for. The next one was this: poor signage. I'm not trying to be condescending in any way possible by saying this. But sometimes I wonder, why is it that denominational churches build buildings right on the main drag, the prime real estate in society, the greatest location in town. And as I've sometimes been traveling to preach at a church, I'll drive through the town and I'll see many denominational churches on the main drag. But it's this turn and this winding road and that winding road and this dirt road and that gate you got to cross through and this bridge you got to go over. And there's a Church of Christ building way back there. It's almost like we don't want to be found sometimes. And that was the case with many of these churches. The churches just could not be found. They were looking for signs to help them find the building. They were looking for signs as to where to park, where do members park, where do handicapped folks park, where do visitors park. They couldn't find those things. They could find no sign as to where I'm to enter the building. We have a lot of doors here at Eastern Meadows. Many churches have many doors. Which door do people enter? Where do we go in? It's kind of awkward as a visitor to go in the wrong door, to end up way back where in the building somewhere. They were looking for signs. When they got in the building, they could not find signs to the bathrooms. They couldn't find signs to the classroom wing. They couldn't find signs to the auditorium. They were lost in the church building. And I've been in church buildings where I've been lost before. So you can see how this would be something that would hinder someone from coming back. The next one is this. They're in the service now. And in the service, they perceived that the church had their own insider church language. When you listen to a church's announcements, the such and such group's meeting on Tuesday night, and the such and such meeting's taking place at 5 p.m. today, and the such and such group's going to show up at the building on Saturday. All these code names and all this special lingo. And church members who hear that every day know the language. They know what those acronyms stand for, and they know what that lingo means, but someone from the outside hearing all that is perplexed. It's just insider language to them, and they feel more and more like an outsider. Again, we wouldn't think about those things, but from the visitor's perspective, that makes sense. The next one is this. It's not going to surprise you, but what surprises me is where it is on the list. Boring church service. The guests did not come back because they perceived the service was boring. It was lifeless. It was dull. There was no energy. There was no passion. Now again, that's not surprising to be on a list as to why a guest would not come back. But what is surprising is this, that it's not higher up on the list. You see, we often say, and I don't like saying it because I don't think it's really entirely true, we say, well, folks don't come because they just want to be entertained. Folks go to that church because they just want to be entertained. And I don't think that's entirely true when you look at the research and the statistics that are available for us to study. Yes, it was a reason why, but look how low it was on the reasons given. They perceived that even the members didn't want to be there because of the atmosphere of the church worship service. So if they didn't want to be there, why would they as a guest want to be there? Next was this. The guests were actually told, "You're in the wrong pew." Or, "You're in my pew." Now, if you're not ashamed to say it, raise your hand if you've ever been told you're in the wrong pew, or you've been told you're in my pew. I've got some hands up. There's a few hands up. Isn't that sad? Isn't that so sad that someone would come, visit a church, they're looking for meaning and they're looking for purpose, they're looking for answers, and someone says, "Hey, you're in my pew." Wow. That's a reason why people didn't come back, and you can see why they wouldn't come back. The last one is this, number 10. The facilities were dirty. You know, we're blessed here at Eastern Meadows to have a beautiful building, a very clean building, a very safe building. We're thankful for that. And I realize that many churches are doing the very best they can with the building they've got and the facilities they've been given. But friends, the building looks like it's unkept, if it looks like it's abandoned, if it looks like bugs have taken over a classroom somewhere, if it looks like the pews have more stains than a Tide commercial, you can see why someone would choose not to come back. What a dirty and falling apart facility conveys to the community is there's no life here. And if they can't keep up a building, how could they help me spiritually? That's what people perceive. So you might sit back and you might think, well, Brandon, those things really aren't important. I don't see why we're spending an entire class talking about things like that. Friend, it is important. These are real reasons why real people will not come back and visit a church again. They're hindrances, really. Go ahead, Carl.
All these things that you list up here, fundamentals for a marketing or just a regular business. Mm-hmm. But this is the Lord's business.
That's right.
So, the thing is, these are just, things that support just a regular business. So, if these things, if you go outside, like for instance, the same thing, all these things right here, would you go into Winn-Dixie see, you see where I'm coming from?
Exactly.
See, the thing is, it's somewhat of a difference, but however, these things are basic to any business. But however, when you're talking about the Lord's business, why would you have a bad sign? I mean, somewhere along the line, you need to find some money, or somebody that's talented enough to put a decent sign, put the Lord's name on it.
Exactly. The point that Carl's making is we would not do this to our business. We wouldn't run a business this way. We wouldn't let our business that we're trying to build and really establish be perceived like this. What about the Lord's house, the Lord's cause? Go ahead, Stan.
One of the worst we've run into is you get into an older church and it has a musty, I haven't been open all week smell. That alone stops everything from going back again.
Yes. Exactly. Go ahead, Alan.
I think in some small churches, there's a thing about which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Can I get members and get enough contribution to do something about this or that? Otherwise, I can't do anything about it. That's the situation a lot of churches are in. We don't have that situation.
Exactly. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'll just mention this here at this juncture. Whenever I was at North Lowndes, we had a beautiful little building, but one of the things that we did is we kind of had a work day and we used our folks and we really spruced up that building. We totally redid our foyer. I mean, it was really a morale booster. And when people came in, they noticed it. It's something small as that, and it doesn't take a lot of money really to do things like that to help. But lest we run out of time, let's think about number 2, this next slide here. We've seen the visitor's perspective. Now, what are some steps that we can take to be more welcoming to guests? Let's mention some things. Every church can do these things. Now, not all of these will be applicable to us here at Eastern Meadows. Some will. Some we're already doing. Some we can do even better. So just hear me out on these things. Here are some steps from those results that we could take. Number 1, provide clear signage for visitors. Make sure your building is seen. Make sure your sign is there. Make sure you have signs pointing people where they need to be. Make things as easy as possible for a visitor. Provide clear signage. Number 2, create a manned welcome center. We have a great welcome center, but I would love to see our welcome center manned before services. It is during services for security purposes, but before services. We'll say more about that in a moment. There's a reason why these folks are here. It's to help visitors, to help newcomers. That's their mission in the foyer. Number 3, spend time sprucing up the building. It doesn't take much, doesn't take a lot of money. Every church has talented people. Every church has people who can decorate and paint and do things like that. Thankfully, we have a very beautiful building, and those things really aren't so much needed here. Next, invest in a clean and simple website. It doesn't have to be expensive, doesn't have to be extravagant, but just a simple and clean website that's geared towards a visitor. That's geared towards a visitor learning where you are, how to get here, how to be prepared when they come. Next, create a rotation of trained greeters. I would love to see us have a group of people known as our first responders here at Eastern Meadows. Every church has folks who have a gift of encouragement. They're so skilled at smiling. They're very friendly people. Friends, utilize those folks. Give them some training and put them in that foyer. They're the first responders, the first point of contact when a newcomer comes this way. Now with that, a greeter is not just to say, "Hey, how are you?" They're responsible for taking this person to their next step. "Oh, you have children. Let me show you where the children's Bible classes are." And they will take the family to the class. They will introduce the children, the parents, to the teacher. "Oh, let me show you where our bathrooms are. Let me show you where our nursery is. Let me show you where our auditorium is." Things of that nature. Rotation of trained greeters. In a moment or two, in a couple of weeks, we'll come back to the idea of retaining folks. How do you take a new convert and train them to do ministry? Here's a great thing for a new convert. Anybody in the church who's on fire is a new convert. Anyone who's excited is a new convert. A great job for a new convert. Next, greet visitors with genuine and casual greetings. No need for a formal stand and greeting time like many denominational churches do, but we as a church must break out of our holy huddles, break out of our bubbles, leave our section of the building and greet people with genuine greetings. They're here for a reason, and we're happy to see you. We're so thankful you're with us. Next, have a simple connection card system. We call those our visitor cards. Many churches, in fact, probably most churches have them. But it doesn't take much information from a visitor to follow up with them. With that is this: follow up with guests within 24 hours. Now, I've known of churches before that have a guest card system. And when those guest cards are received, if they're received, in this situation, it went to a book, the person who kept attendance. And those guest cards were put in the book. And I sometimes joke that book was then booby-trapped. There were rubber bands wrapped all around that book to keep people out of that book. It was almost an untouchable book. But Brandon, every Monday morning, would go and take off the rubber bands and go in the book and get the cards. And I would make it my practice to follow up with guests within 24 hours with an email, a call, a card, a text message, something like that. Don't mean to call him out, but Ron Hodgkinson gave me a book recently called Boomerang. And it presents an idea called text in church. It's a text follow-up system with visitors. Ron's got some great ideas, and that's one of them. Next, take time during worship to explain things. Remember that inside our church language? We might know what these things mean. We might know what the Lord's Supper is all about, but a guest might not. No need to rush through worship. Take the time to explain things that might not be as clear to outsiders. It's important to them. Create a biblical and upbeat worship environment. Friends, sing out. Say a hearty amen. Let's worship God like the Lord Jesus Christ is living. So those things are just 10 simple suggestions to be more welcoming to guests. Now, Brandon, you got to know, Brandon, the building's not what saves people. Don't you know? Brandon, you spent an entire lesson talking about a building and what goes on in this building. The building isn't what saves people. Amen, right? Absolutely right. That's true. But friends, the whole point of this is this. How a person is treated and received inside this building can keep them from being saved. That's why this is important. As we're reaching out, folks will start coming. And when they come, we've got to be ready so that we can take them to their next step. Just sitting in this pew won't save anybody. How can we be ready for them? Make them feel at home and then be able to take them to that next step. We'll come back next week and think about being a church ready to teach the lost. We'll move from prospects and start talking about pupils. How to lead a very effective in-home Bible study. We'll be dismissed. Thank you for being here this morning.